Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a really fascinating plunge into one of the most sophisticated control systems in your body, the endocrine system. Specifically, we're going to try and unravel the incredible mechanics behind negative feedback. It's sort of the unsung hero that keeps your internal world in perfect, dynamic balance. Our mission today really is to give you a clear, concise, and hopefully very memorable understanding of this vital process. We'll cover not just what negative feedback is, but how it orchestrates hormonal harmony, why it's absolutely crucial for your health, and maybe most importantly, what happens when this delicate system goes off the rails. Think of this deep dive as your shortcut, maybe, to truly getting a handle on this complex topic, whether you're prepping for an oral exam or just curious about how your body actually works.
Exactly. And we'll try to go beyond just, textbook definitions. We'll explore the practical side, the implications of these mechanisms, and maybe highlight the really crucial distinctions between different types of endocrine disorders. Because honestly, understanding how the system is supposed to work, how it's designed, that's absolutely key to grasping the consequences when it doesn't. And that insight, well, it's fundamental to thinking about diagnosis, treatment, everything.
Okay, so when we talk about the endocrine system, this term negative feedback comes up constantly. From your perspective, what's maybe the most straightforward way to explain what's actually going on at its core?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It sounds complex, but at its heart, it's kind of simple. Imagine your body has an internal thermostat. Negative feedback is that core regulatory mechanism. It's constantly working to maintain hormonal balance, what we call homeostasis. The basic idea is this. Your body secretes a hormone. That hormone causes a specific response in its target tissues. And then, and this is the key feedback part, that response actually turns around and inhibits the further secretion of the original hormone. It's a self-regulating loop, always aiming to bring things back to a stable point.
So it's really about keeping everything within that optimal range, that sweet spot.
Absolutely. It's this constant adjustment that ensures hormone levels stay precisely within a healthy physiological window. You get these small oscillations around what we call a set point. It really is like your body's most sophisticated thermostat, constantly sensing, adjusting, bringing things back to optimal.
All right, so we've got the basic concept down. But like me, you're probably thinking, okay, how does this actually look in the body? Let's maybe look at how the body handles something really common, like your blood sugar, because that illustrates one of the two main types of this system. Simple negative feedback. What really defines this type?
Simple negative feedback is, well, pretty much what it sounds like. The hormone's own effect directly reduces its own secretion. It's direct, it's efficient, and it gives you that immediate sort of localized control for many everyday bodily functions.
Yeah, a perfect and very relatable example for you is regulating blood glucose and insulin. Think about what happens right after you eat something, right? Your blood glucose levels naturally go up. This surge triggers your pancreas to secrete insulin. Insulin's job. Tell your cells, hey, take up that glucose, which in turn causes your blood glucose to decrease. And here's that elegant feedback loop. Those now lower glucose levels then inhibit the pancreas from releasing more insulin. It's a beautiful, immediate loop, keeps things incredibly tightly controlled.
Right. And you see this exact same principle with cortisol and ACTH. When your body has enough cortisol floating around, that cortisol directly tells the anterior pituitary to stop releasing ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. It's a clear sort of two-player game designed for rapid response. Quick adjustments.
Okay, so that's simple, direct feedback, makes sense. But the body also needs a way to manage more complex stuff, right? Like long-term regulation, things happening all over. That brings us to the second type, multi-level or hierarchical negative feedback. This is where the feedback acts across several levels of an endocrine axis, involves multiple glands, hormones, kind of a cascade. It sounds almost, ridiculously complex, doesn't it? Like a corporate hierarchy, but for hormones.
It does sound like that, but it's actually more like a symphony of regulation, really. The classic example here is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis. It starts way up in your brain. Your hypothalamus secretes CRH, corticotropin-releasing hormone. CRH then nudges your anterior pituitary to release ACTH. And ACTH, in turn, stimulates your adrenal cortex, that's the outer part of your adrenal gland, to produce cortisol. But here's the crucial bit, the real power of this hierarchical setup. That cortisol then travels back up the chain, so to speak, and it inhibits both CRH secretion from the hypothalamus and ACTH secretion from the pituitary.
Both levels.
Yes, both upstream signals. This multi-level control lets your brain orchestrate really complex systemic responses. Think about how your body manages prolonged stress or growth over time. Simple feedback just couldn't handle with that kind of precision.
That's a fantastic point. It really shows the brain acting like a top-tier executive, constantly monitoring and adjusting the whole system. But okay, what happens when these intricate systems, whether they're simple or multi-level, start to break down? Where do we even begin to categorize the problems that can arise?
Well, you've hit on the first major category.
Yeah.
We often start by talking about disorders of the endocrine glands themselves. So the problem lies with the gland either producing too much hormone or too little. It's like the factory itself is either working overtime or has basically shut down, maybe independent of the feedback signals or perhaps just overwhelming them.
Right. Let's start with hyperfunction, meaning hormone excess. Our sources give some really common examples here. Take Cushing's syndrome. This is characterized by way too much cortisol. Often it's caused by an ACTH-producing pituitary adenoma that's a small tumor in the pituitary gland that's just pumping out excessive ACTH, which then overstimulates the adrenal glands to make loads of cortisol. Or sometimes it could be an adrenal tumor itself, just directly overproducing cortisol.
Right.
Then you've got things like hyperthyroidism, where you have excess thyroid hormones, maybe like in Graves' disease, and a prolactinoma. That's a specific pituitary adenoma producing high levels of prolactin, or PRL.
And in these hyperfunction cases, the feedback loop is essentially, well, it's overridden or it's overwhelmed. The gland is just pathologically active, churning out hormone regardless of the signals, or the feedback just fails to rein it in because the production is driven by something abnormal, like that tumor you mentioned.
Okay. And then on the flip side, obviously, we have hypofunction, which means a hormone deficiency. A classic example here is Addison's disease. This is caused by adrenal insufficiency. The adrenals aren't making enough cortisol. And crucially, what you often see with Addison's is a compensatory increase in ACTH. Why?
Well, think about the feedback loop. With low cortisol, there's no negative signal going back up to the pituitary. So the pituitary tries to compensate. It ramps up ACTH production, basically shouting at the failing adrenal glands, make more cortisol. This compensatory rise in ACTH is actually a really key diagnostic clue for doctors.
That makes sense. And then there's hypothyroidism, which is simply a deficiency of thyroid hormones, often due to autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's thyroiditis.
Yeah, and that compensatory response you highlighted in Addison's, it's such a vivid illustration of the system trying desperately to maintain homeostasis, even when a key gland is failing. It's like the body's attempt to send out an SOS signal. But sometimes the problem isn't the gland itself. It's not about producing the hormone.
Right, and this is where it gets, I think, really fascinating for understanding diagnosis and maybe even treatment. We've covered the factory issues, too much or too little hormone being made. But what if the problem isn't the hormone level at all? What if the issue is how the body responds to it?
Exactly. That's often the aha moment for people learning this, because it completely shifts our focus. We move from production to reception. We're talking about receptor disorders, or what's often called hormone resistance. In these situations, hormone levels in the body might be perfectly normal, maybe even elevated. But the target cells, the cells that are supposed to react to the hormone, they just don't respond properly. It's a common source of confusion, but such a critical distinction to grasp.
Okay, let's dive into maybe the most common and impactful example. Insulin resistance, which is, the hallmark of type 2 diabetes mellitus, DM2. This is a really widespread, usually acquired form of hormone resistance. Genetics can play a role, sure, but common triggers include things like chronic high sugar intake, obesity.
Right. And the mechanism here is particularly insightful, I think. Your peripheral tissues, think muscle cells, fat cells, they become less sensitive to insulin. They don't listen as well. Initially, your pancreas works overtime. It tries its best to compensate by pumping out more insulin, trying to force those cells to respond. But eventually what often happens is insulin receptor downregulation. The cells actually reduce the number of insulin receptors on their surface. It's like they're plugging their ears because the signal is too constant, too loud.
Wow, so the cells themselves adapt by becoming less responsive.
Exactly. It's a protective mechanism gone wrong in a way. This leads to persistent hyperglycemia, high blood sugar, because the glucose can't get into the cells effectively, and ultimately the development of type 2 diabetes. It's fascinating how the body tries to cope, but eventually the system just gets overwhelmed.
And there are other really important examples of this receptor resistance idea. Consider pseudo-hypoparathyroidism. Here, your target cells, especially in your bones and kidneys, they're just unresponsive to parathyroid hormone or PTH. The features are striking. You'll see high PTH levels because the body's making plenty, but there's no biological effect or very little. This leads to hypocalcemia, low calcium,
Oh.
which can cause things like numbness, tingling, muscle spasms, cramps, and in really severe cases, even dangerous cardiac arrhythmias.
Yeah. Or another one is pseudohypoaldosteronism.
Yeah.
Here, the cells in the kidney tubules are insensitive to aldosterone. So even though aldosterone levels might be high, the kidneys fail to do their job of retaining sodium properly. Clinically, you see hyponatremia, low sodium, water loss, and often hyperkalemia, hypotassium.
Okay, and one more key example.
Absolutely. Nephrogenic diabetes insipidus, sometimes called renal diabetes insipidus. Here, your kidney tubules are resistant to antidiuretic hormone, ADH. This hormone normally tells your kidneys to reabsorb water. If they're resistant, they can't do that effectively. The result is impaired water reabsorption, leading to the kidneys producing huge volumes of dilute urine that's polyuria and consequently intense thirst or polydipsia. And this happens even though ADH levels might be high or perfectly normal. The problem isn't making ADH, it's the kidneys failing to listen to it.
You know, this raises a really important question for you, the listener, to think about. How does knowing where the problem lies change things? Is it the gland not making enough hormone, or is it the cell not responding to the hormone? Because that distinction fundamentally changes how doctors might approach treatment, right?
Absolutely. It's the difference between, say, replacing a missing hormone versus finding ways to make cells more sensitive to a hormone that's already there. It's a key diagnostic puzzle, and it dictates the therapeutic strategy.
Okay, so to sort of bring this all together for you, our deep dive into the endocrine system today has, I hope, revealed some really critical insights. We've seen the incredible precision, the elegance with which your body tries to maintain harmony.
Yeah, let's recap the most important takeaways, maybe the things you'd want crystal clear for, say, an exam, or just for a solid understanding. First, negative feedback is absolutely essential. It's the bedrock of hormonal regulation. Second, understand both simple and multi-level feedback loops. Know how they operate, why they matter for different kinds of control, immediate versus systemic. And third, crucially, be able to clearly distinguish between gland dysfunction, that's the gland itself, overproducing or underproducing a hormone, and receptor or post-receptor defects, which is what we mean by hormone resistance.
Right. Those are fundamentally different problems.
Exactly. And remember the key examples we talked through. Cushing's syndrome for hormone excess, Addison's disease for deficiency, type 2 diabetes mellitus is the classic for insulin resistance, and things like pseudohypoparathyroidism showing PTH resistance. Always try to relate these conditions back to that core concept of homeostatic imbalance and the body's often quite fascinating compensatory responses. Getting that distinction clear is huge for understanding pathophysiology.
We really hope this deep dive has given you a clear, concise, and maybe even an unforgettable understanding of these vital physiological processes and what happens when they go wrong.
And maybe just a final provocative thought for you to mull over as we wrap up. Consider how our modern lifestyles, our diets, our stress levels, maybe our activity patterns might inadvertently be pushing these incredibly sophisticated endocrine feedback systems right to their limits. Think especially about cases like insulin resistance. What subtle signals might your own body be trying to send you about maintaining that balance?
That's a fantastic and maybe slightly sobering question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning and please stay curious.